Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome Nana. Thank you very much for coming back for part 4.
Here we are again.
We are. So for those of you that haven't watched the other videos, the links are at the end and I'll put them up the top. This is my Nana. She's Lois Griffith. She's 96 years old and we are talking to her about things that have happened in her rather extraordinary and ordinary life all at the same time. So Nan, we were just talking as I was setting up the tripod and the camera that you were getting that you're going to go to jail today.
Yes, well, I've had this pestilence call, and 3 times yesterday they rang me to say that I would be going to jail this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why? And they said, you haven't paid your income tax.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very funny because I don't pay income tax anyway. So I told her to get lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what were you saying about it's because you've been around?
I've been around too long to get caught in by these people that are trying to use oldies as to making a quick dollar.
Yeah, most definitely. And so the other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, especially as travel restrictions are being released, is you've done a lot of travel over the years now, and so we'll talk a lot about some of your travel adventures, but the one I want to talk about was your trip to Cambodia, and you did that.
Lovely.
You were 84?
Well, it was just on 13 years ago.
Okay, so you're 83 when you went to Cambodia.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Well, you see, Melissa bought her backpackers hostel in Siem Reap, which is not far from the Angkor Wats and all that sort of stuff.
So Melissa's one of your granddaughters?
Melissa's one of my twin granddaughters.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I would like you to be there, Nan, for the opening and all the rest of the jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So with her mother, Elaine,
Mm-hmm.
I flew to Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
It was an uneventful trip, but I went first class, so I was well looked after.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got there, the little bloke and picked us up and took us out to where where Melissa's place was.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't quite finished, but the Cambodian people are the loveliest people that you could ever meet up with.
Mm-hmm.
They're so gentle, and they've been through so much with Pol Pot killing off all their older folk and anybody that had intelligence because they wanted to keep a race of servants there.
Mm-hmm.
And as I come from Queensland now, as you know, Elaine and I got up very early and did all our explorations of all the Watts and all that, which were fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of the people, they got up at lunchtime and they were very hard pressed with perspirations and all the rest, and we just sat back and let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Melissa also was a patron of a Australian woman. She was married to another Cambodian, a very gentle man, and they took children off the streets and put them in and made a home for them.
Mm-hmm.
And these little people were absolutely a delight.
Mm-hmm.
And one little girl came up to me and she said, will you be my grandma?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, as you know, I never promise anything to a child that I can't keep.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't live in this country and tomorrow I'm going back to my country, but I'll be your grandma for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So she was quite happy with that.
That's lovely.
So we went out where there was this party was going on that Melissa was putting on. She said, please, Nan, put on a kids' party like you've done through us and make fairy bread.
Lovely.
So I made fairy bread.
Mm-hmm.
And fairy bread, for those that don't know about it, is bread and butter with hundreds and thousands of sugar. That's all it is.
Yep.
It's cut into little diamonds. Anyway, the children of this place, they entertained us in turn with a concert.
Mm-hmm.
And this Tanya, she's a lovely girl.
Mm-hmm.
She's this Australian girl, but she's a very, very big girl.
Mm-hmm.
And she's having them taught English and computer skills so that they will be able to get them off the streets and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, there was this one little person that came up and there was balloons going and all the rest of it. And as I've mentioned, Tanya is a big girl.
Mm-hmm.
And this little person put balloons up her t-shirt and shrugged herself and said, Tanya. So you never should discount what children are thinking.
Yeah.
And Melissa's always took an empty case, and we always bought stuff from the markets because that was their only means of making money. And it was one of the few times in all my travels that I was absolutely didn't want to be an Australian. There was a man there at the markets, one of these bombastic creatures that probably was the first time he'd ever been anywhere. And he was downright rude, this girl. Anyway, I bought stuff to bring home and all the rest of it, and I said, oh, we're not all like that. I said, I'm ashamed to be an Australian when we meet up with that. Anyway, when I got back to my room, there was an extra length of material and a note. Thank you for treating me as a human being.
Wow.
And I thought, well, you know,
Yeah.
I've met up with before. I met up with one Australian and he was in Singapore, but they're very few and far between.
Yeah.
And I had a lovely time. But the other thing that got me there, you see, because of Pol Pot, all their older people had been killed. And I had grey-white hair.
Yeah.
So everywhere I went, I saw big brown eyes looking at me. And I said to Tanya what she said, some of them have never seen a person with grey or white hair like you've got. So she said, they're not being cheeky. I said, no, I'm not taking them as being cheeky, but I said, I just see these big eyes.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were invited to the Feast of the Dead. And this is where people are supposed to come back to their birth.
Oh.
And they have a little cake and they have a ceremony of feeding them. They go all around. And I took one and I was a little bit apprehensive and I said, what about, they said, we would be proud if you would take part in our ceremony. So it was really, really lovely.
Lovely.
But they are inclined to be, well, what we used to say, manana, it'll do tomorrow. They'd half finish a fence and that'll fix that up and things like that. But that's because they've never had any direction. Yes, so that's why Melissa had to have an Australian overseer to get her place finished, because otherwise there'd be half a window in or a room made of straw or some darn thing. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And to go out and see these temples with trees growing out of the centre, it was something that I'll never forget.
Yeah.
So that's my Cambodian thing.
And it was it's pretty amazing to be doing that all when you're, 83 years old and hopping in tuk-tuks and climbing through temples.
The tuk-tuk fellow, he put out my hand and I took it. And at first he didn't know whether he should or not. And it was just like getting into a sulky with a little foot thing. And I said, I'm extremely grateful for you to helping me up. And Madame, I said, I'm very grateful. He said, I was very worried.
That's lovely.
Yes, and that same tuk-tuk man, Melissa, until she sold the place, she made him the one in charge of escorting people from the airport to her
Lovely.
place, yes.
Lovely. And because you've travelled a lot, Nanna, over the years.
Yes,
You've been
I have, yeah.
some pretty remarkable places. And you're still travelling.
Well, I've got to stay restricted now to Australia, but there's very little places in Australia I haven't been. So, but if I get the opportunity to go, I will.
Yeah, once once this pandemic is more under control, you might be able to start doing some of your day trips again.
Oh, well, I've definitely gone on the day trips. Not that I haven't been everywhere around here, but still.
Yeah.
It's a trip out.
Yeah.
And you meet very nice people. Sometimes not so nice. I've had a few males that thought they were getting a house for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And they got a short shift.
Yeah. Well, it was 12 years since Gramps died.
This week.
This week, yeah. I'm sorry I didn't call the
Never
school
mind.
and everything
It
at all.
was just one of those things.
Me.
But we had one man that used to attach himself to us single women on the bus, and after all, it's normally people like me that have got enough to pay for these trips that go on them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he came up and he said, do you live on your own? And I said, what business is it of yours?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, do you own your own house? I said, do you own yours? So he said, I only speak to women that own their own house.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said, well, in language that you will understand, bugger off. Because he was just trying to get some stupid female that he would move in and then the house would become his. He'd never done anything for himself. And he certainly wasn't getting the one that your grandfather provided for me.
Yeah. Nana, it's not that, there are guys who ask me when I'm going on dates, do you own your own home? And I'm thinking, this is a first date. This is none of your business. Well, a
boyfriend of one of the relatives, I won't say where, he said, you've got an old Nanna who's getting her house when she dies.
Oh, dear.
He's no longer the boyfriend.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, you got a short shift.
Yeah. It's terrible.
None of my children, my grandchildren, ever think about what they're going to get or what they're going to give. Well,
that actually is a beautiful segue, Nan, because that allows us to segue into the black barrel.
Well, your grandfather was a bushie.
Yep.
And he said, there's two things, Loy, when we lived in the country, because I was a city girl and I had a lot to learn, and I really loved my 10 years on the farm in Nangus. And he said, there's two things I want you to promise me. That you've always got a barrel of water in the car and enough food that you can, not a tin with no tin opener, but food that can be kept and keep you, should you be on the road on your own or with the children. So that was what it was. Now, this black barrels, they were little 2-litre barrels, which we used. They had solution in them for washing down the dairy.
Okay.
And that's where they came from. And one of the trees not far from the dairy, there was a dirty big hole there, and there'll be dozens of these barrels. But we had two.
You see, we've thought about flooding them. Melissa and I have thought about flooding the market so we could all go down there and dig up our own black barrels.
It's all now houses on it.
Oh.
And so when Michael came out of university, the next day, Lang Hancock's secretary rang up and said they wanted him because he did so well at uni. His father said he's got to have a black barrel. He's got to have one. He said to Michael, do as you've been brought up with, always have the black barrel. So he had it.
And so that's used to carry water in them?
Only rainwater. And Michael still has that black barrel over in Perth, and it's only rainwater. Now his family over there are wondering who's going to get the black barrel when he pops off. I've got a few over here, and I said, when I pop off, you will draw lots to find out who gets the black barrel, and it'll only be of my children to get it as yet.
All right.
Yes, so because that cuts, there's too many.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have been angling for about 20 years myself.
Yes, I know. And your mother even offered to mind it for me. And I've got it hidden.
Now, so this idea of a barrel that's nearly 70 years old, it's what, plastic?
It's a kind of a plastic, yes.
So this 70-year-old plastic black barrel, and it's been this running joke in the family since long before I was on this earth. What is that about? Why have we have this entire family culture
it's
of being
just
in love with
one of those
barrel?
family things, you know, about having who was going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
I had another kind of a barrel,
Mm-hmm.
and it was made of wood
Mm-hmm.
that I used to keep all our papers and the school things and all that until it fell apart. So then I got a plastic container. And this is where the barrel came, the name of a barrel came from, I think, from the older ones.
Mm-hmm.
The same as the name at our farm is made up of the names of the two older children and Les and me.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Now, because I heard a theory, Nan, that the reason the black barrel became something for our family to jokingly bicker about, is because of the coming from your side of the family about there was some drama about the family Bible. Is there any truth to that?
The family Bible, yes, we never got that. That went. The family thing. You see, both my parents came from military families, both sides.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my father was cut off his inheritance by his father.
Wow.
He bought him out once,
Mm-hmm.
and my father went back in again. And because of that, they were cutlery people by the name of Halpin, and very, very well off.
Mm-hmm.
And his
Did you ever meet them? Did
no,
you?
no, because Dad was cut off and I was in Australia and he was out here. And their name was Halpin.
Mm-hmm.
And he married a woman with 12 children.
Mm-hmm.
So they got all the inheritance.
Wow.
Dad had two brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And one, Elaine, or not Elaine, my sister Connie used to correspond with.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, would you believe, died of sunstroke.
Wow. In the
In
UK.
England. Makes you wonder.
It does. Well, I've had some sunny days when I lived over there. They were
Yes.
few and
Well,
far between.
I was in Scotland and all the fellows had no shirts on. It was only 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And they all looked like a piece of beef because they weren't used to the heat and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. But that's a different kind of heat to what we have
Yeah,
here.
it did. It did. London would hit 20 degrees and it would be so hot,
Mm.
as opposed to today where it's 20
Cold.
degrees and
We're cold.
yeah. So because that was the theory I'd heard, was that the black barrel was a bit of
It's just a family thing that's gathered moss as the years go by.
Yeah.
And one time they all went through and they had the wheelbarrow out there and Michael got everything of family heirlooms that he could find out of the shed, plus the black barrel, and he was saying, "Glimine." There's a picture of him.
Yeah, and there's another one of Uncle Graham where he did a yearly calendar of him holding the black barrel.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and then so all the brothers and sisters got to see him holding the barrel, and then Uncle Mick had black barrel caps made for everyone.
Yes, he did. Yeah. It's just something that's grown from nothing sort of thing, you know. But that's where it was. It was a container holding solution for washing down the dairy.
Yeah. Nice. And did you take it with you when you travelled with Gramps? Because you travelled a lot around Australia with Gramps.
Oh yes, we went 3 times and more around Australia. It's always was in the boot, and I only took it out of the boot of the car when I sold the car.
Really?
And I only sold the car really because your grandfather was still alive, and the doctor wouldn't sign him to have his licence.
Yeah.
And he took it very badly because he'd had a licence since he was 11 years old.
That's right.
I've got it. And because his dad owned the only car in the district. And so it was making him very unhappy for me to be able to drive and not him. So I couldn't cause him unhappiness, and I cared about him and loved him so much. I rescinded my licence and sold the car, and it's down the Gold Coast even now.
Yeah, no, Mum's old neighbours,
Yes.
Craig and Ruth have it.
Yeah, that's right.
So and apparently he's restored
It's
it up a
beautiful.
real treat.
It's absolutely beautiful. I saw it when I was down there staying with your father's place. A few years now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he did a wonderful job on that car. And because I was going through some photos now, and I saw that you were in Cameron's Corner. Now, Cameron's Corner, for those of you that don't know, is where 3 states, Queensland, New South Wales and South Australia, intersect. And did you know, Nan, that less people have been to Cameron's Corner than have been to the South Pole. And you're one of them.
Yeah, that's right. Took a picture.
Yep.
And there's another picture of me where clean your tyres before you come through the dirt in one of the country towns. Just at the moment, the name eludes me. And your grandfather took me dusting the tyres on our car to make sure that no dust went through the town. And the same as Fitzroy Crossing, because as a young fella, he'd gone through Fitzroy Crossing, and we went there. Well, we've been there each time we've gone around, and it hasn't changed from when he was a 16-year-old. It's still the same place.
Yeah. Some of those country towns are very...
There's nothing there.
Colonial. Their buildings are still all the old colonial buildings.
There was no buildings much, it's just a crossing.
Yeah.
And he took with a 22-year-old 1,000 head of cattle from Port Hedland, and they drove them across to Fitzroy Crossing.
Wow.
And they never lost one.
Wow.
Then they were shipped out,
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, Gramps, had he joined the Navy before the war, or did he enlist because of the war?
He was just before the war. And he was of the crew that went over to see the recommissioning of HMAS Perth. He was on the first berth.
Wow. And
he had the kudos of saying that he swore at the king.
Yep.
I've told you about that.
Yep. Yep, that's in one of the videos, guys, where we talk about how our grandfather swore at the sovereign. And
he could swear back. He was pretty good at swearing the king.
Yeah.
And another time, because the Perth was set in Sydney, and I lived in Sydney then, at Barnes Point, and we looked over all the harbour and everything, which was really lovely. And Les was on duty, but his fiancés and so on were allowed to go aboard. And he was on top of the gangway, and you know, gangways float up and down with the tide. Anyway, the commander's wife, who was a jumped up piece, and he got disrated later on for the way he treated his sailor. And as this woman came up, your grandfather put out his hand, as a gentleman should, because the gangway was high up, and to help her down. And she brushed his hand away, and she fell on her face. So he laughed. So he got 2 days in a cling for that.
Yeah,
But things changed after that, of course, and as your cousin Vernon, he was a Commodore in the Navy, and he was what they called it the New Guard, where they dispensed with Royal Navy things and started the Australian way of life.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, it's nice that we are...
He's even in the books of history,
We're slowly pulling away from that. And there are a lot of people, Nan, who want Australia to be a republic, who no longer want to have a Queen of Australia.
I think when my old people like me, I have no doubt that it will be a republic, and if that's what the people want, yes, and there's no reason for us to be tied anymore.
Yeah.
The only thing is, I would like the flag to stay. I would hate to see a boxing kangaroo or something of this, because I think that's just garbage. But the Union Jack in the corner, that's our heritage, and it's all the history of when we first started. And each star there's for the states, and then the federation star.
Each point on the federal star.
Yeah.
What about Indigenous people who see that Union Jack as
well, I quite understand about the the Indigenous people. I feel extremely sorry for them.
Yeah.
And they really had a bad time with the early people. But then they in turn did some very nasty things. When you travel around Australia, you find out how they killed off people and all that. But they didn't know, they had no civilization. And for someone to come in and say, this is my land, and you'd been watering at that hole for all generations, of course they were upset.
Yeah.
I feel very sorry for them. But some of them today have a chip on their shoulder. And I took a fellow to task when we were travelling around. We had a caravan as usual, and we were going into this place, and this Aboriginal man was at the garage. And I said to him, I said, where's the closest caravan park from here?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he said, I'm an Aboriginal. So I said, well, what's that got to do with it? You live here, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, you know, it's a bit much, but of course it's how people have treated them in the early days.
Some of those towns, and they're
very bad. And one of the worst ones was Halls Creek.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of those Aborigines we've, since found out were products of the stolen generation and they've been in and out of institutions. But so what if people said we want to change we will just remove the Union Jack and just leave the Commonwealth Star and the Southern Cross? Would that bother you?
Well, it wouldn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, well, this is the choice of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't go backwards.
That's true.
But and I don't believe in going backwards. When people say the good old days, I think, what's good about the good old days?
Yeah.
Yes, no. But if there'd been a choice, I don't believe that a politician should say whether the flag is. It should be made by the people of Australia.
I agree. Yeah, send it to a plebiscite.
Mm.
Well, you've seen a lot of politicians change in your time.
Yes,
now.
I know some of them aren't worth feeding.
No, who was your favourite Prime Minister?
I've never had a favourite Prime Minister.
Really?
No.
Not.
I think they're all rather lacking.
Yeah.
And some of them are really wishy-washy.
Yeah.
And they're only mouthpieces for the people that they belong to.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't a mind or a brain of their own.
Yeah.
And when they got Julia Gillard, and she was a very able speaker. I'd listen to her when she wasn't what she was. And she had a really rough go because she was a female.
Yeah.
And hadn't children.
Yeah, and people were something came up with the current Premier of Queensland here about the fact that she has not had children. And I think some comments have gone towards New South Wales's Premier about her having not had children as well.
Yes, well, it's no business of theirs.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't know. It's very hurtful because they may have lost children and not been able to have them.
Yeah, I do agree. Now, Nan, you've moved a lot. So you started your married life in Sydney, and then you went to the farm when Gramps was offered.
Before that, we went across to Western Australia and we were going to take up land in the Stirling Ranges there. Mm-hmm. And we went down to have a look at it because your grandfather didn't like cities, really. He was bushy.
Yeah.
But when we looked at all that there, we would have had to have a ball and chain to clear this land.
Right.
And I said, I'm not going to have, I had Graham.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not going to have him ragging his life out trying to clear this place.
Yeah.
So I said, and the Stirling Rangers then, they had a group of people that were anti-Aboriginal.
Right.
And this one woman came up to me and she said, oh, we have one white school here.
Oh dear.
Yes, and I thought, in this day and age?
Yeah, and this is the late 40s?
Yes, so I said, I don't wish to live here.
Yeah, now, where are the Stirling Ranges, Nan?
Down the south of Western Australia.
So down near Albany?
Yeah, and anyway, and I'm so proud of one of my grandsons, Blake. Mm-hmm. They were down the south of New South Wales, and his best friend was an Aboriginal boy. Mm-hmm. And one of the mothers got to Sue, and she said, your son's friend is an Aboriginal. And Sue just shrugged off, being Sue. And she said to Blake, your best friend's a black fella. And Blake turned round, he said, is he? I hadn't noticed. And I thought, well, that was just the price of that woman.
Yes.
Yes.
That's lovely.
We have no worries in our family. The colour of his skin is not important.
No, well, when Bronwyn was giving birth to her first child, so your granddaughter Bronwyn, and she was living in Singapore at the time. A couple of one or two of your friends had commented that it was concerned that you would have a half Asian great grandchild.
Well, my eldest brother was born in Calcutta. because Dad was stationed there with the British Army.
Mm-hmm.
And when she went back, this woman came up to my mother and she said, but he isn't black. So my mother said, well, I'm not black and his father's not black, why would he be? She said, but he was born in Kolkata.
Oh dear.
Just shows the ignorance of people.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the internet has all of human knowledge we thought would get rid of a lot of ignorance.
Yes, it's still
but
hanging around. Yes, it's really nasty.
It really is.
Yes.
And
I would have thought with the education, but I think education is much poorer today than when my children went to school.
yeah, I don't have.
They haven't any general knowledge whatsoever. And I watch all these things on TV to keep my brain sharp and answer all the questions. And they may be all right in their field, but when it comes to general knowledge, or the knowledge of their own country, they haven't a clue.
You know, Nan, when I first moved to America, and I was working at Sony Pictures, and I was in the cafeteria, which they call in Hollywood, they're always called commissaries. I'm sure someone online knows why. So I was in the commissary, and this guy heard my Australian accent, and he said, "Oh, you're Australian." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, "Oh, we have a new Australian that started on our team." I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Oh, you know, it's so interesting because we have such a different history from yours." And I said, "Yeah, you know, we have and me, of course, I assumed that being that Americans have a far more myopic view of the world than we do." And he said, "Oh, yeah, she's never heard of the Vietnam War." And and my first thought was, "Oh dear." And I said, "Oh, she must be quite young. Is she, 21, 22? Because I thought maybe she's young enough that it was her grandfather that fought in the Vietnam War." And he's like, "Oh no, she's 35. And I went, "Oh, well then she's an idiot."
That's right.
And the guy said, "Yeah, no, because Australians, you don't know anything about the Vietnam War." And I went, "Actually, we did. My uncle did 3 tours of duty. It was the first time we had conscription, and our Prime Minister at the time even said, all the way with LBJ, it created some of the largest civil unrest in our country's history." And he goes, "Oh." And I said, "So no offence, but you've employed an idiot." The guy goes,
That's
"Well, you're
true.
blunt like her."
Yeah, well, I was in Wynyard Station going to an RSL do, which I did as a delegate. And I had the badge that I wore that I was a mother of a Vietnam veteran. And this woman came up and she said, "I know those, what's that one for?" And I said, "That's I'm a mother of a Vietnam veteran." She said, "No Australian was in Vietnam." So I said, "Well, you should tell that to the mothers, sisters and brothers of people that lost them there."
Yeah.
And I said, "For your information, I have a son in Vietnam."
Yeah.
And I said, and he got the military medal for bravery. So she said, I said, "Yes, he went 3 times." And I said, "He was a regular army."
Yeah.
And I said, "I had a couple of sons that were at uni."
Yeah.
And I said, "They were sending them birthday boys, they call them, over to Vietnam with very little training." And I said, "My eldest son said, I would go the 4th time if it would save baby brothers from going because I'm trained."
Yeah.
And he used to train them. And I said his glory was he took a group of blokes over there and he brought them back alive.
Yeah. That's an amazing achievement. That's a really amazing achievement.
But this business have not known about Vietnam. And then we had a march in Sydney of Vietnam veterans, the first time. And you know, a woman ran through the ranks with red paint on herself to say they had blood on their hands.
Oh dear.
And I was very worried because my son was in charge of the flag and they had fixed bayonets. And he was a Vietnam veteran, as I say.
And they all had PTSD.
And I said to him, "What happens, Graham, if this happens?" He said, "Mum, the guards on changing the flag that people have given their lives for, I would turn them around with fixed bayonets and I would give them the order to use those fixed bayonets. Because when it comes to cold steel, they're cowards."
Yeah.
And it was a very shaky worry for me that day.
Yeah, it was a very, I mean, it definitely changed Australia. I know when we went to war in Iraq, our media spoke a lot about we had to make sure that we treated our returning veterans with much more respect
They
and honour
don't.
than we treated them. No, we don't.
And now they've got this thing on that they're trying those poor blokes that they reckon that they committed war crimes in there. That came on from the ABC, a reporter.
Yeah,
Should have been chucked out in the first place.
well,
And as you know, what they didn't know, the Viet Cong, they would lace up a kid with bombs,
yeah,
and Australians, being Australians, would never touch a kid.
yeah,
And then they'd go off.
yeah. Yeah, guerrilla warfare is a,
It's horrible.
yeah,
And that's what Graham said, he would never go on patrol with Americans.
yeah.
He said once they smoked scented cigarettes. They had scented aftershave, and he said in the jungle they stood out like, you
Yeah.
know, they would just come and get me. And he said they never went through infiltrated through the jungle, they only walked on paths.
Yeah, right.
So he said no.
Yeah, it was. Now, because you know, you are from a military family, and then
Yes,
you
I
have,
am.
you know, generations of military before you, and then your children, but none of us grandchildren actually decided to pursue any military careers.
No, it was only like my sister's son.
Yep.
But the rest haven't.
Yeah.
And as their father used to say, there's no winners in wars.
Yeah.
And when that Gulf War started, he cried because he was an old man then. I don't want my grandchildren to go to war.
Yeah.
He worried about it
Yeah.
because boys and the girls aren't safe either.
No, that's right.
No.
I mean, you've got Ione's husband, who's an
He's 10
ex-serviceman.
years in there, and his
Yeah.
brother now, who's adopted me as his nana.
Yeah.
He's a lovely man.
Yeah.
And now he's done. He was a petty officer, chief petty officer, and now he's a lieutenant. He's got
Oh,
his
that's lovely.
commission. And I'm very proud of him, and I
Yeah.
told him so.
Well, good now.
Yes. And I'm making him one of those poppy emblems that I'm making to give to him as well.
That's lovely, because you knit poppies for the
Yes, I do.
for Anzac Day and for Remembrance
Yes,
Day.
some of
and
my poppies knitted are on the War Memorial in Canberra.
Lovely. And so we'll still do more of these, Nan, but I wanted to ask you, given that you are 96 and we expect you to be here till you're at least 100,
I am.
what things do you have planned in the next 4 years that you'd like to do?
Travel a bit, see a bit more of what I've already seen. But all that I just want to know and meet up with all my children, because my life is my children and their children. Yes, I've got such a wonderful family, and I've been very blessed because my children never, with their father being with bad health, they never gave him 1 minute of trouble, and they were really conscious of the fact that their dad was on borrowed time, and never ever, and he loved them all very dearly.
Yeah. What would you like to see that you haven't seen, Nan?
There's nothing I haven't seen that I've wanted to see.
Yeah. I know you wanted to see the Great Wall of China, but
Well, that's beyond it. Yes.
yeah,
I know there's no good wanting things that you know you can't have.
that's true.
You've got to come to terms with what you've got and what you have got, and not wish for something that's out of this world.
That's true.
And my doctor that was a Chinese there, she said, you haven't wasted your time there. She said, I've been on it. Thousands of people trying to track on it, and she said the steps, you're too short. She said the steps there, you'd have to get a piggyback in some places to get down to the next
Wow.
step. Yes,
Yeah.
so she said no. She said you haven't missed anything.
Yeah. Well, Nan, since the restrictions have eased off in Queensland, what about if I take you for a drive this afternoon? We'll get you out of the house.
That'd be lovely to get out of the house. No worries.
Okay, Nan. Well, thank you everyone for watching Nanna again. Thank you, Nanna.
Thank you.
And we'll do this again soon.